This episode of Who's Your Neighbor features best-selling author Stephen Gaines, who shares wild stories about his childhood, his career path, and the history of his infamous house where he lives in Wainscott. Then, it's Minerva Perez, Executive Director of Hola, talking to us from her home in Sag Harbor about her life, her love of the East End, and what she is doing to advocate for the growing Latino community. And Tales from the Talkhouse, with Stephen Talkhouse promoter and manager Nick Kraus, who gives us an inside look at the world-famous music venue, plus what life is like as a local in Amagansett, and his passion for Soldier Ride. It's all here on the next episode of Who's Your Neighbor?
I was born in Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst. I grew up above my grandmother's bra and girdle store, which made me gay. It's a very common symptom. Well, listen, if you're a little kid and your whole world revolves around the bra and girdle store, when you're 7 years old, you see things no 7-year-old boy should see. I mean, it was pretty frightening because, well, I can't begin to tell you, but there were no gyms back then, so these women were saucy and stuff. And I used to see naked women growing up, so I grew up gay. And then when I was 15, I happily, gladly signed myself into Payne Whitney, a psychiatric clinic, because Marilyn Monroe had been there the year before. And I thought that was, and I spent 5 or 6 months there. It was a great experience. This was a kind of a posh place, and I met really accomplished, interesting people. I met writers and architects and Broadway producers. I learned that there was another world out there for me. And so instead of it being this terrible, terrible thing, it was a springboard for me into another life. I was writing these books, and I got a job as a newspaper columnist. I was the top of the pop columnist for the Sunday News in New York. And I had entree to nightlife, to plays, to concerts, and I was running myself ragged. And every time I had a book project, I needed to go somewhere to actually write the book. And this is where I was drawn to. So in the beginning, I would rent a house for 6 months in the winter and go away to write a book. And then I'd rent a house for a year. And then this became my primary residence out here in the Hamptons. I live about 45 seconds from the most gorgeous beach in the world, Wainscott Beach. You know, the dogs and I go there every morning. I was in love with the Hamptons when I wrote Philistines of the Hedgerow. That book's a love letter. And still sells. It's really amazing, and is going to be a movie. I was on the New York Times bestseller list with The Love You Make, the true story of the Beatles. Heroes and Villains, a biography I wrote of the Beach Boys, was also a major bestseller. There are bestsellers I did that people really weren't aware of because it wasn't of general interest, but when I wrote Philistines at the Hedgerow about the Hamptons, and I lived in the Hamptons, it became more known to everybody else. And a lot of times somebody will say to me, "Oh, I read your book," and I'll be a brat and say, "Which one?" So, but I generally just say thank you and pretend I'm Jay McInerney. Thank you. I love my house. I finally found a room big enough to contain my ego. The horse was lived in the window of Ralph Lauren in Southampton. And when they were taking it out of the window, I went in and I said, "How much is that horse?" And everybody said to me, "You're going to put a window display in your house?" And I said, "Well, I love that horse." So I got the horse here, and then we realized the horse was transitioning. And because we didn't know whether to call it a boy or a girl, and we realized that it was neither. So it's a delicate situation for us, and the horse with no name. And then it's interesting because the horse's ass faces a David Sally, which is of a horse's ass. It's a David Sally poster, and he literally drew on it a horse's ass. So we have horse's asses back. I got this from Andy Warhol. I begged it from him, actually. People were always asking Andy Warhol, "Oh, sign this, give me this," or something. And I went to one of his openings, and I gave him this, was I think an invitation or something. And I said something that amused him, and so he said, "Okay, I'll sign it." So it says, "To Stephen," and then there's a naughty symbol there, "To Stephen Andy." And That's my band. He gave me a couple of other things. He was really, I was always trying to schnorr something from him, Andy, can I have one of the... So he gave me a cow for Christmas, a piece of the original cow wallpaper for Christmas, and he gave me a Campbell's shopping bag, tomato soup shopping bag. It would be very hard for me to get rid of this house. This house was built by the guy that owned the gay bar. It's the guy that owned the Swamp and Annex. And he built this house close to where the Swamp and Annex was. So when it closed at night, the patrons who were still there, they used to call it lust call, not last call, would come here. And this was an orgy house. So all the bedrooms had video sets in it, and you could put a tape in one tape, and the porn would play in all the rooms and everything. And so when he died, I bought the house from his estate. And after that, people would say to me, you bought that house? Well, I've had sex in that house. So after like the 30th person said they had sex in my house, and I never had sex in my house, it drove me crazy. I bought a new washing machine, and the washing machine guy, delivery man, came. This big fat guy was pushing a washing machine, and he says, can't believe I'm back in this house. So I said, please tell me you didn't have sex in this house. He said, no, I bought an eighth of Coke here and jumped off the roof into the swimming pool. So this house has quite a history. Of course, nothing's happened here since. I used to go to Studio 54 all the time, and I had because of my column, the top of the pop column in the Sunday News, so I had free access to Studio 54. It was a very tough world. So I decided to write a book about Studio 54, a roman à clef about Studio 54. Except I didn't disguise the characters too well. For instance, Steve Rubell was Steve Shorter, and Halston was Ellison, and it went on like that. It was just terrible. Andy Warhol called me up. I kind of knew him from, I was, in the Van Allen belt of his friends. And I wasn't a friend. He was just somebody he knew. And he actually called me up and he said, how do you think you're going to get away with this? And I really didn't. The Velvet Hammer came down on me. They announced $60 million worth of lawsuits, and they never followed through, but it was in all the newspapers and stuff. The book was called The Club. And so after that, I went back to writing biography, and I did the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and then I switched gears because fashion stars were becoming like rock stars, and I did Halston, and then I did Calvin Klein. I've always done things that ruffled feathers. You can't raise your head above the crowd without getting shot at. You can't try to tell the truth about something without getting shot at. Running for office out here was a horrible thing. I was told that running for office would be tough, would be difficult, that it gets very mean, that it gets meaner than you believe. But I ran for office in a way that was bound to provoke people, because the head of the Republican Party out here at the time, Bill Wilkinson, came to me and asked me as a Democrat and a gay Jew if I would run on the Republican ticket. And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? Why are you asking a gay Jewish Democrat to run on the Republican ticket? And he said, well, we already have the majority on the town board. Even if you lose, we won't lose the power in the town board. And I like your ideas. I like who you are. And as long as, you don't come out against the Republican Party while you're running for office, you can be our environmental person, and you can do all these things. You can be a spokesman. And they didn't stop me from speaking out about anything. So I had a real opportunity to say what I felt about this town and how East Hampton was changing and what could be done. It was a very, very good opportunity, but all that anybody else could see was that I was a turncoat. I was a Democrat who was running on the local Republican ticket. And it wasn't about major social issues. This was not about pro-life or whatever. This was not about gay marriage. There was already gay marriage out here. But it was not about that. It was about the waste plant. What should we do with, should we ship our poop out, up island and pay a half a cent on a fluid ounce? It was crazy. But those were the issues that I had to deal with, parking and stuff like that. People stopped talking to me. People absolutely stopped talking to me. People cut me dead. There were bumper stickers that said, "Stop Stephen Gaines." Bumper stickers that said, "Stop Stephen Gaines." It was pretty horrifying to be driving along in your car and see this thing on the back of a car. So it was not fun. I was very, very much relieved when I lost. and never again. I'll tell you about really a turning point for me out here in the Hamptons, which was one day some lady called me up and said, "I was given your phone number and I think we should start a film festival in the Hamptons." She just had come home from Telluride. So the light bulb went off in my head and I said, yes, we should. So I went to a group of people. Now this is 27 years ago or so, way before Philistines of the Hedgerow or any of that. So I went to a group of people that I knew out here that had some influence. I asked Tony Ross if she would join the board, and Tinker Topping, who started the horse show out here, and we put together a group. And they wanted to call it the Hamptons Film Festival. I said, no, it has to be the International Film Festival. And it took root. And I was vice chair of the film festival for 7 or 8 years, which is a long time for a Jewish person to be on a board. And then I quit, and the festival goes on. I figured after all of these books, and I was pushing 70, that it was time for me to write my own story, which I did. I sat down, I did. It's the last book I published, and it's called One of These Things First. And it was smashed, got great, great, great reviews. It was on a lot of best picks of the year, best books of the year, stuff like that. And it's the most rewarding thing that I ever wrote, because it's about me. I got to tell my childhood and my story. I mean, I was really, had a lot of problems. By the time it was 10 or 11, I had OCD. I had huge problems. I couldn't go to school. I kind of seized up. The odd part of it, though, is when I told them why I was so miserable, they said that homosexuality was curable. And that if I really wanted to be straight, it was 1962, I really wanted to be heterosexual. I really did. And if they could do that for me, I agreed to it. Nobody pushed me into therapy or conversion therapy, anything. I was the proponent. I wanted to be a heterosexual. And so I spent 10 years. And the thing about it is the basis of the cure was copious coitus. In other words, I had to sleep with women in order to, and the more women I slept with, it was going to be like an acquired taste, like scotch maybe. So I had to sleep with more women and more women. And the way I felt about it was I realized that in bed with women that this was a beautiful thing in front of me, but I kind of felt like a Jew in the Vatican. I could see the Sistine Chapel, but I just didn't get the resurrection. And I realized that I was hardwired, that this was a natural part of the population, and if I could stop hating myself and let myself be, I would be. I encourage everybody, not necessarily to publish, although you can self-publish now, but I encourage everybody to write down their story. We've all got a story to tell. It's not the specialness, it's not that you climb Mount Everest or you did this or that. It's the commonality of the struggle that we all have in life and that we all face that appeals to people. And if you can get that down on paper, you've achieved a lot.
At this particular moment in our country's history and our global history, I could not be doing anything else. So this keeps me going. I wake up every morning and I have to tell you, it's a little weird, but I wake up and I'm just like, social justice. What are we doing today? OLA was founded in 2002 as a nonprofit organization, founded actually in East Hampton, and to support, to promote, to protect, to advocate on behalf of the Latino community. And it's kind of morphed into a mission that is really centralized in art, advocacy, and education. By achieving this mission, it is for the better health of the entire East End. The work that we do right now is not just for Latinos. It is a benefit for the entire East End. Just getting around is difficult, so OLA has started a free service to drive people to doctor's appointments, door to door, if they're not eligible for any other kind of help. Our public transportation right now is horrible. It is not viable. The bus stops at 7 p.m., that it takes 3 hours one way to get from Springs in East Hampton to the Panago healthcare facility. Luckily, we did advocate strongly and quickly enough that Bridget and the town of East Hampton, they were able to carve away some time from another bus route, so that now we have the 10B that takes about half the time to get from Springs to the healthcare facility. That's still an hour and a half one way. It's better than 3 hours, but this is an example. We've gotten into schools in Southampton, in Riverhead, in Southold, and we've done these teen empowerment workshops. I find that teens in general, no one seems to trust them. So either they're being labeled as a gangbanger, or they don't care about the community, or whatever. You know, people are not putting all their trust in a Latino teen right now, right? So when I get to work with them a little bit and really establish that I do truly trust them, then sometimes I've done this exercise. They don't know what's going on, and I line them all up and say, okay, like this, and hands in between hands, and I say, okay, don't move. This is a very important exercise, and I'm trusting you. I'm going to put my life in your hands, and then I go really, really far away. I take my shoes off, and then I run and take a flying leap into their arms. But I know they're going to get me. I know that I'm not going to hurt myself. I know that they're going to protect me. And in that moment, I see in their eyes that it means something. That this person who doesn't know them fully, but I had enough time to know that these kids were trustworthy and that they were not going to let me down, and they didn't. And that moment is a kind of a precious moment. I'm Puerto Rican, Italian, and Polish, and I grew up in Miami. I was born in Manhattan, but I grew up in Miami. I was raised by my grandparents, my Jewish grandmother and my grandfather, and my mother was with us at the time. She's with me right now, but she was mentally ill, so she couldn't raise me, so my grandparents raised me, and I had a loving, wonderful home. And South Florida, interesting place. I've been out here now a little over 15 years. I came out to the East End as a result of a marriage breaking up, and I kind of knew that Sag Harbor could sort of be that solace for me. I had to sort of talk him into it. As a person being divorced, it's hard to talk the ex into anything, but I knew that this would be the right place to raise our daughter from 6th grade through high school, and my daughter loves Sag Harbor now. But anyway, I went to NYU for theater. And then after I graduated, I signed with an agent, so I was doing mostly auditioning, some things here and there. I did Law & Order, I did some things. After graduating and doing some auditioning for about four or so years with an agent, it was kind of soul-crushing. It was not really where I wanted to be. I wanted to do more actual acting and less preparing my hair for, you know, the casting director. I consider myself in many ways as a placeholder, because I am, you know, I look at myself and I'm like, I'm not exotic. I'm not, you know, I was born in Manhattan. I'm Puerto Rican partially, but I've recognized that there's whatever it is opening doors for other folks, and I recognize the importance of that, but I don't fool myself either. I'm a placeholder for people, for teens, for Latinos who've been living here for a number of years, who are leaders in their own capacity. You don't have to be an elected official to be a leader. My real wish, and it's my real wish, is that this community that I've grown to love as much as I have in 15 years, I've been searching for community all my life. I've been searching and searching and searching, and then I found it in this weird, rarefied place called the Hamptons. I see all the beauty in the people, the beauty in the nature, the landscape. It's such an amazing place, and yet I see these families kind of falling apart needlessly. So what I hope and I dream for the future of this place is that we come to a place where we're able to recognize each other's gifts and benefits, and why we can extend that trust and that care out, and that doesn't take anything away from us.
I was born out here on a weekend. My mom was pregnant in the summer of '71, and I came a few weeks early, and there's a hurricane coming through, so I was supposed to be born in the city, but I was born out here. And I always summered out here. My grandparents had a house out here, and my parents summered out here. And when I was going to college, at one point, halfway through, I dropped out, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I came out here for the summer like I ordinarily would, and I just stayed. And I met a girl, got a dog, got a truck, did my best to be local. And like a bad country song, the truck broke down. The girl left, and then the dog died. But so I ended up restarting everything, and all for the better anyway, except for losing the dog, of course. Yeah, so I've been out here in one way or the other my whole life. I've lived in other places briefly, back and forth to the city, but this has always been home to me out here. Just the people that you meet. I love the beach. We love Louse Point because we live around the corner from there. Georgia Beach is, where I grew up, so that's a favorite to me. But even going back to Shadmore back in the day when it wasn't actually a park and you got to drive through these humongous puddles and scale down the cliff, you never run out of places to go. And even during the winter, if you want to go down there and just, think for a bit. I was going to New York University and I wasn't studying much of anything, which was part of the problem. Probably would have gone for English or film, and I just wasn't applying myself, to say the least. So I figured rather than waste any more of my parents' money, I would take some time off and figure out what I was going to do when I grow up. And I'm still working on that. I really didn't make any decisions about anything. Things just sort of happened. I've never actually decided to do anything really per se, except that just one thing came to another. And I always threw parties in high school and college, and that was something that I was good at. And so it was sort of a natural fit for me with my love of music, my inability to play any music. So as a professional listener, I started getting involved with the Stephen Talkhouse, and I've been there since I was a kid now. So I've been there a long time, since 92, 93, something like that. Because the night that I was born, actually, my father ended up driving out in the snowstorm, in the hurricane, out to Southampton Hospital, and then ended up at the Talkhouse the night that I was born, which for many years I thought was cool when you'd run into an old timer at the Talkhouse, or the night you were born, your dad gave me a cigar. And then later on, I realized that's probably partly why my parents aren't together anymore. What's Dad doing at the Talkhouse on the night I was born? But it was a different time. As far as the Talkhouse now compared to when I first started there, a lot of it's the same. I mean, some of the music's changed. If you didn't come back there for 20 years and you walked in, you'd probably see the same bartender, and you'd probably be sitting at the same exact bar that you were at before. And that's part of what's great about it. Everybody's treated the same. You're treated well if you're nice, and you're treated poorly if you're being a so that's if you're a celebrity and you show up and we like you, then sure. But if you're two guys showing up in flip-flops, you're going to get in just as quickly as the supermodels are going to get in. And we pride ourselves on that. And we still have a fun and good-looking clientele, but we don't have to be sitting there picking and choosing people, and that's not what we're about. And your status is not going to make any difference in whether we let you in or not. Well, the craziest thing that ever happened to the Talkhouse, I can't tell you about, but sorry. There have been a few crazy things there. Having Paul McCartney in the room is pretty cool. I don't really care about celebrity that much anymore, or ever really. And you admire certain people for the work that they've done, no matter what it is. But when Paul McCartney walks down the street and he knows who you are, I think I've always thought that was pretty cool. And they were there on my 40th birthday when Gary Clark Jr. played, and we got the guest list, and the guest list was people that have all been there before, but never all together. And so when you start looking at this list, and it's John Wenner from Rolling Stone, and it's Jimmy Buffett, and it's Bon Jovi, and it's Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, and Paul McCartney, and then they all actually show up, and then they're all upstairs in your office, and you're sitting there with them, and you're like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then you mention it's your birthday, and oh, it's your birthday. Anyway, stuff like that was a pretty good birthday present. So what's the appeal? It's a small place. We treat all of our artists really well. And also, it doesn't hurt that the geography of where these folks live is around the corner. And they can walk in, they know that they're not going to get inundated, we're not going to use them for anything, we're not going to take photos or videotape them and sell it to TMZ. So they know they can go there and be treated as well as, or equally as poorly as anybody else is there. Stephen Farrow, Talkhouse. So I'm probably saying his name wrong, but I think that's how he became Stephen Talkhouse, because nobody ever pronounced his name right. I think it was Talkhouse. But he was Montauk Indian tribe. He was a word carrier, which so basically he would, like a mailman, and he would just and start walking the trail system from Montauk all the way to New York City. And along the way set a lot of records, because that was a thing then, back in the late 1800s, was to walking competitions. I don't know, for speed, for distance, but it was a thing. I think it might even still be a thing for some people. But he was world renowned for it, or at least nationally known for it, and also fought in the Civil War, worked for Ringling, Barnum and Bailey Circus. So he was a jack of many trades and a very interesting character during the time of transition here with the local Indian tribes. When you go out to the Hamptons, they usually don't pay attention to the Southampton, Watermill, da-da-da. And then you've got the old Indian names. So you've got Nepegue, Montauk, Amagansett, and so all these places have a meaning to them. But Stephen's history is a very interesting crossroads of where sort of modern age white people meets the original locals and natives of the Hamptons. And so we named the bar after him. And he's got obviously a legacy, and I'm not sure if he'd want to be named after this place, but we try to honor him as best we can and respect his position in history.
Soldier Ride was something that we started out of the bar, actually, originally, with one of our bartenders, Chris Carney. And we had been doing some benefit concerts for wounded veterans that we had heard about on Long Island in 2003. And so over some beers, we were complaining about all the work we're doing, but it's a new venue for us and it's not going great. And Chris said, well, why don't I ride my bicycle across the country to raise funds and awareness for injured veterans? And I'll just ride my bike all the way from Montauk to California. And so we're drinking beer and we're like, yeah, why don't you go do that? And we got about $10,000 in cash and pledges and so forth. And so we went back to Chris and said, well, Chris, now you actually have to ride your bike across the country because we just stole $10,000 otherwise. And he got on his bike in Montauk and rode all the way to San Diego, Grotto. In the Garden of the Gods, we had two amputees ride with us, Heath Calhoun and Ryan Kelly, with one leg between them. Both lost their legs in combat. And that was sort of our aha moment. We're like, wait a second, why is a bartender doing something called Soldier Ride when we see what a great thing it is for these wounded veterans to be able to get out of the hospital, get on a bicycle, have the wind in their face, all the cliche stuff. Also show the newly wounded that, hey, these guys don't have any legs and they're riding their bike in the Rockies. And also to show the American public, because it's a volunteer army, the sacrifice that's being paid by these young men and women overseas. 30 Warriors joined us on that part. We get to Arizona, we get to the Diamondbacks Park there. 20 Warriors leave, 30 come on, and it was like this relay race across the country with Heath and Ryan and Chris doing the whole thing. And we did it again in 2006, and then it became a regional ride. And then later on, it became just individual states. So it's been a pretty amazing experience, and now it's helped tens of thousands of wounded veterans. It's been duplicated around the world. It all started just over drinks at the Stephen Talkhouse. So that's one of the things that's amazing about the place. It's always helping out either somebody that's local in the community that maybe their house burns down, or starting what's become a huge national effort, international effort to help wounded veterans.